Ganyu can deal a lot of damage in the right setup, so this video will showcase 5 most popular teams you can build based on the latest Abyss usage data. Just after getting released, Shenhe quickly became one of the best duo partners you could have for Ganyu, although that's not saying much since you can basically use this character with nearly any cryo unit and still see great results. But what separates Ganyu from the rest is her massive burst radius and the constant damage it delivers, which makes it extremely easy to consume all the quill stacks with her, not to mention the fact anyone standing inside the burst gained 20% cryo damage bonus, which pairs really well with Shenhe's cryo resistance shred from her burst, so they both end up creating a strong synergy for the rest of the team. Which is why this duo really shines as mono cryo, and there's actually 2 variations that became relevant, and the more popular one involves using a hydro healer like Kokomi or Barbara to keep the team alive, but more importantly, you get to freeze your enemies and enable Blizzard Strayer's set for Ganyu and the other cryo damage dealer. Now, the other less popular variation is Diona with Kazuha, so that you can shred the enemy's cryo resistance with Viridescent's set, and Diona can keep the team alive as well as use up all of Shenhe's quills, so building Diona with more critical rate and damage is actually a decent choice if you want to see her Kitten Paws deal significant damage. But when you look at the equipment choices, Shenhe usually has at least one 18% attack artifact set, and then it's either Emblem 2 set or just more attack if you've got her energy under control. And as for her weapons, Favonius Lance is the go-to choice, but Calamity Queller and Skyward Spine are also common picks. Otherwise, Ganyu and the other cryo unit obviously need to have Blizzard Strayer to take advantage of the set, and as for the weapon, any 5-star bow like Amos or free-to-play option like Prototype Crescent show up often, while when it comes to Diona, almost everyone uses Sacrificial Bow and Noblesse 4 set, and as for Hydro Healer like Kokomi, Tenacity 4 set and Thrilling Tales have become the gold standard for her. And finally, if you use Kazuha variation, then you already know it's Viridescent 4 set that makes the team go from good to great, and either Favonius or Sacrificial Sword if you struggle with these burst activation off cooldown, but otherwise, it's going to be either Iron Sting or Freedom Sworn. So with all of that said, the biggest strength of this team is that you can get really good results after unloading all of Shenhe's quills, but since you have to make the choice between Hydro or Animo character, you're essentially going to either lose out on 20% critical rate and maybe even be forced to look for an artifact set that can replace Blizzard Strayer if you use an Animo character, but at the same time, going for a Hydro teammate means you can only reduce enemies' cryo resistance with Shenhe if you're not using Chongyun, which could go up to extra 10% from his skill's passive, but that's still a long way from that fat 40% you could get from Viridescent. It's also important to note that Animo characters can use Shenhe's quills, but I guess a lot of players prefer to use a freeze mono cryo just because of insanely good results you can get from the Blizzard Strayer set. High risk and high reward is the name of the game for this Melt Ganyu variation, because while her freeze teams are definitely more popular, there's just something about those bloom shots that can go into 6-figure damage numbers. Now, the core of this Melt Ganyu team comp is Xiangling with another pyro unit, who most often is going to be Benny Boy, and then a flexible role that usually gets filled by Zhongli or any other shield character, just so Ganyu can remain uninterrupted when she does her charge shots. Or alternatively, Venti or Sucrose are used if going up against multiple enemies. But the most important objective you need to achieve when using this team is to have Benny and Xiangling's burst ready once their cooldowns are finished, because the majority of damage comes from melting Ganyu's charge shots. But on the flip side, you don't really need to build energy recharge on Ganyu, because in almost every fight you won't be using her burst, since it can overtake Xiangling's Pyronado, which means it nearly becomes impossible to score melted charge shots. The other big thing about Ganyu herself is how people choose to build her. There's a split of opinions on whether you should go for Shimanava's or Wanderer's 4 sets, because while technically you can get better charge shot damage from Shimanava, the additional 80 elemental mastery from 2-set bonus from Wanderers can actually be a major damage increase, and she also doesn't need to use her elemental skill just to get that charge shot bonus. However, seeing how Shimanavas can be farmed from arguably the best domain in the entire game, there's a chance you might end up with a good set sooner than Wanderers, depending how lucky you are, so probably the most important decision falls down onto whether you can get at least 100 to 200 elemental mastery from Shimanava's set. But the key takeaway here is that the first 100 or so elemental mastery is better than just crit damage or attack, because melt reactions take advantage of this stat and super amplify the final result. And as for her weapons, Amo's bow is the most common choice, but other 5-star bows remain as popular alternatives as well, while free-to-play pick is usually Hamayumi, since it's really easy to maintain the passive when you almost never use Ganyu's burst, although it does have a conflicting relationship with Shimenawa's set, so there's always Prototype Crescent as a popular substitute. Now, going back to teammates, you definitely want to push for as much energy recharge as possible, so Xiangling usually ends up with the Catch or Favonius Lance and Emblem 4 set to push for at least 200 to 230 ER, and even then, I personally found that often you need to quick swap to Xiangling and funnel particles just to get the Pyronado loaded up, so it never hurts to have a lot of energy recharge. And as for Benny, the usual Noblesse and either Favonius or Sacrificial Swords are used on him, while Zhongli usually has a Tenacity 4 set and either Black Tassel to maximize his shield absorption or Favonius Lance just to generate even more particles for the team. So with all of that out of the way, pretty much the biggest selling point with this team is that it has insane single target damage and even decent enough AoE damage, but since you cannot really group everyone together and you have to fight at a pretty close range, this team does end up losing out on true area damage potential. There's also the whole thing with energy recharge and how well you need to manage it just to have both Benny and Xiangling bursts up all the time, not to mention the fact if Ganyu's bloom shots are not critical hits when they melt, a lot of damage is lost, and this gets even worse if you miss the shot completely. But when the stars do align and everything works out just fine, this team ends up eating every single enemy alive. I think that the best thing about Ganyu is that if you're willing to do it, you can get really creative when it comes to increasing her bloom damage. Now, this team comp takes advantage of Kazuha, who will perform a lot of different tasks, just so you can get better melted charge shot damage than the previous team comp I just talked about. And the core of this team has to be Kazuha and another pyro unit, while the last position can be filled by anyone, but from usage statistics, it's usually a shielder like Zhongli. So the most common variation is with Bennett because of his obviously powerful attack buff, and the rotation this team needs to do is by first applying cryo, then using Bennett's burst without hitting the target, and then finally using Kazuha's elemental skill to swirl the cryo element on the target and follow up with the burst so that it can infuse with pyro aura on your active character from Benny's field, and then switch back to Ganyu and deliver from 4 to 6 charge shots depending on how good you are with aim cancelling. And the reason why this is called double swirl with Kazuha is that you first reduce enemies' cryo resistance and then infuse with pyro to create Kazuha's burst that now does pyro application, so Ganyu can deliver powerful melted shots. This is definitely easier said than done type of rotation, because a slight mistake can lead to a major damage loss, and unlike with previous team comp that had Xiangling, while it does offer less damage for Ganyu's bloom shots, at least it's very easy to set up melts with Pyronado. Of course, nothing is preventing you from just running Xiangling together with Kazuha and Benny, but this puts a lot of pressure on Ganyu when trying to actually deliver those charged shots without a shield. Speaking of which, you can use a C4 Yanfei with roughly the following build shown here and get really good results in this variation, since she'll activate Pyro Resonance and provide Thrilling Tales buff for Ganyu. So all in all, this team comp variation offers a ton of damage potential, but it comes with the same set of drawbacks from the last team comp and demands good energy recharge from Kazuha and Benny just so you can have the bursts ready off cooldown, and the difficulty to pull off the whole combo without making mistakes is even harsher. So while this duo of Ganyu and Kazuha is popular, it's more or less a team for those who like to perfect a difficult playstyle and get rewarded for it. Which one would you choose, Ganyu or Ayaka? Well, why not both? This is pretty much the most premium team you'll find in Genshin because basically the other two spots are also filled with 5-star characters, which are going to be either Kokomi or Mona for enabling freeze, and then either Venti or Kazuha to do the usual Anemo stuff. The most popular variation currently is made up of Ganyu, Ayaka, Kokomi, and Kazuha, and let me tell you, the amount of damage you can dish out with this team is absolutely insane, even when going up against someone like Mago Kengi or the Mechanical Array in the current Abyss cycle. And what's even cooler is that the rotation itself is pretty simple. You open up with Ganyu's skill and burst, swirl with Kazuha's skill and burst, use Kokomi's jellyfish, and then switch to Ayaka, whose burst will now hit like a truck, and finally get back to Ganyu, unload a couple of her bloom shots, and then just repeat everything all over again. Now, the equipment is pretty much what you would expect. Ganyu has Blizzard Strayer and one of the previously mentioned weapons, and Ayaka leads with the same artifact set, while Mist Splitter is her #1 pick followed by other 5-stars, and then Amanoma Kageuchi for better energy generation. Finally, Kokomi and Kazuha have the same loadouts as shown in the previous team comps. So the biggest strength of this team is obviously the insane damage output you can achieve with both Ganyu and Ayaka, but the drawback is that you pretty much need to sacrifice all of your resin just to obtain 2 decent Blizzard Strayer sets, not to mention the fact how expensive this team is, unless you saved up or got lucky with these characters. Either way, it's fun to combine 2 strongest cryo damage dealers to see what they're capable of when working as a team. If you ever did any kind of research on the most popular Genshin teams, you knew this one was inevitable. And it's kind of funny, back when Ganyu first got released, everyone was too focused on her bloom damage, but after a while, her true potential got revealed in the Morgana team comp that basically made Freeze extremely popular. And this classical setup includes Diona, Mona, and Venti, but as I previously mentioned in the video, the core of a Freeze Ganyu team consists of her, another cryo character for energy, a hydro applicator, and an anemo to shred the enemy's resistance, as well as provide crowd control if possible. So has anything changed about this team setup? Not really, you've still got Ganyu with Blizzard Strayer's set abusing critical damage and attack stats to maximize her potential, while Diona usually holds Noblesse and Sacrificial Bow, and then there's Venti with Elegy for the End, Stringless, or even Favonius Warbow, coupled together with Viridescent Forset, and finally there's Mona, who actually has had the most interesting development, because it used to be that a lot of players had Witsith on her, but it's actually not that great, since it has been proven that Mona doesn't contribute that much of her own personal damage, and one of the passive bonuses Witsith grants is almost useless for the fights, so it's actually Favonius Codex or Thrilling Tales that became a go-to weapon for her. In fact, it's extremely important to keep her burst up at all times, and you need a lot of energy recharge for her, so Favonius Codex is a really comfortable option that helps achieve this, but I personally use Thrilling Tales since I got pretty lucky with the substats. Oh, and when it comes to her artifact choices, it's usually full emblem set, however, in a freeze comp, since you keep everyone frozen, you can actually use Tenacity of Millilith, since her skill and the final duration of the Tenacity buff can provide about 9 seconds of total buff time, which is a pretty nice power boost you can give for the team. Finally, when it comes to the rotation, it's pretty simple. Use one of the cryo character attacks, go to Venti's skill and burst, then Mona's burst and skill afterwards to maintain maximum duration of freeze, and then finally circle back to Ganyu to start blasting everyone with her charge attacks. There are many different ways you can make small changes to the rotation, and it really depends what other teammates or artifact sets you swap in and out. So with this team variation, the biggest strength has to be its AoE damage, while the downside is that it will of course struggle with single target damage, and there's no better example than the current Abyss cycle, where you breeze through the first 2 chambers, and then there's Magu Kenki waiting for you, who cannot be frozen or moved, and that nosedives your team potential by quite a lot. But with all of that said, this team pretty much wipes the floor with multiple enemies, and if you have the chance to get Kazuha, you can even improve single target damage with him by swapping out Venti. An honorable mention goes to support Ganyu, which is not a joke and is used quite often with Hu Tao, but it does seem like almost every team Ganyu is in, there has to be another 5-star. While this is kind of true, there are budget options you can go for, like for Melt Ganyu, you could use Xinyan, Noelle, or C4 Yanfei as a shielder instead of Zhongli, but at the end of the day, these are just some popular variations that have the Coco Goat in them, and hopefully this gives you an idea what type of teams you could try building with her. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'd appreciate if you could press the like button and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and see you soon.